So, welcome everyone. Um, it's nice to be back together with you again after the summer. I'm going to start with a few basic definitions. Probably many of you know that pralaya is a Sanskrit word with many layers of meaning and levels of application. Pra, when used in relation to a noun, is an intensifier, meaning great or preeminent, as well as source or origin. And laya at a beginning level literally means to dissolve or disintegrate. So pralaya then refers to a period in which that which is manifested in a specified area or arena of evolution enters into a state of obscuration, latency, repose, and rest, of relative non existence or non being. And in that sense, the idea of pralaya is a very familiar one to any observant person. All of visible nature follows the law of periodicity. Days are followed by nights, waking by sleeping, birth by death, summer by fall and winter, waxing by waning. Nitya means eternal, constant, perpetual, or ceaseless. It is one of the names of Shiva, who destroys not out of malice, but in order to regenerate and renew. No form, fixed condition, or expression of the divine can fully embody the boundless potential of the divine mind, the animating and guiding root of all things. To seek the infinite in thought requires the repeated letting go of all finitizing and concretizing tendencies of the mind, for example. To embody the boundless heart, all clinging to the separative ego must be reduced to a zero. To breathe in new air, we must breathe out. So, ceaseless death and rebirth is a kind of precondition, really, allowing for logoic renewal, spiritual growth, and expansion. And in the metaphysics of and metapsychology of Gupta Vidya, as we shall see, Nitya Pralaya, ceaseless dissolution, goes hand in hand with Nitya Svarga, ceaseless creation, like the yin and yang of Taoist thought. And this ceaseless coexistence of dissolution with recreation is a visible fact at both the macro astronomical and microscopic level. Modern astronomy has verified that at every moment, countless stars and systems are in the process of being born, while others are dying or being reabsorbed. In March of 2021, Hubble captured this remarkable picture of M87, a giant elliptical galaxy in the constellation Virgo. At its core, M87 is a black hole, estimated to be billions, hundreds perhaps, of billions of times larger than the size of our sun. Like the hundreds of millions of black holes that exist in our galaxy alone, its magnetic gravitational force is so powerful that all forms of light, mass, and energy are pulled into, are absorbed by, and disappear within its event horizon. While such black holes are thought to exist at the center now of most, if not all, galaxies, telescopes have also observed that black holes have or emit from their centers enormous and powerful energy outflows called relativistic jets, which are still unknown as to their exact constitution. And in addition, astronomers know that the same forces that create black holes create the galaxies that rotate around them. This is one aspect, perhaps, of what is referred to as the war in heaven, spoken of in Hindu mythology, the constant interaction of contrary forces balancing each other out at every level of manifested life. Nitya Pralaya is kept in balance and harmony by Nitya Svarga. Modern science also knows that the physical body is made of such carbon-based star stuff, with over 32 trillion cells constantly being generated at various rates, while others are dying and being discarded. The entire physical body is regenerated at a cellular level every 7 years. The stomach rebuilds itself every 4 days, while the digestive cells within the stomach do so every 5 minutes. The epidermal layer of the skin entirely replaces itself every 4 weeks, while the 4 to 6 million red blood cells do so every 4 months. Bones are the slowest, taking 7 years to entirely renew. So Theosophy teaches that not only the physical body, but the pranic, astral, desire, and lower monastic vestures are continually absorbing, dissolving, and emitting life atoms, interdependently and instantaneously linking us to a vast macrocosmic fields on hidden planes with every other being and kingdom of nature. And that the quality of the life atoms that are attracted to us, to our vestures, are determined or is determined by the inner states of thought, will, and feeling that we generate, with continuity of spiritual aspiration and purification, noetic ideation, and heartfelt service. A complete renovation, it is said, over a course of 7 years is possible, even while embodied. Death is the pralaya of an incarnation, where all vestures dissolve back into nature like rivers to their respective ocean. On average, across the planet, 150 people die and 250 babies are born every minute. Renewed by their dissolution into unity, the new vesture recoalesces at the new incarnation in perfect continuity with the karma of the race, family, nation, and the immortal individuality who is their trustee. Guided by the unerring hand of karmic law, everything manifested is in a constant state of flux and change. As Heraclitus said, no man steps into the same river twice. When this endless cycle of birth and death is endured in ignorance, the term samsara describes it. The word is derived from the Sanskrit root samsar, meaning to go round, revolve, pass through a succession of states, to move in a circuit. It also means wandering. The first noble truth of the Buddha encourages us to deepen our awareness of the pervasive suffering, potential loss, and self-destruction that can be entailed in this cyclic wandering, by sharpening our awareness of the causal chain which binds humanity to an otherwise endless series of unconscious rebirths. And in this way, divine empathy, the seed of bodhicitta, the altruistic, wisdom-seeking mind, begins to awaken. It is the natural response to wish to aid and benefit all others who are suffering in this way. And it is this heart light, we're told, alone, which can properly guide and generate the resolution needed to enter the path. The constant cycle of birth and death, of dissolution and regeneration, perpetually active at the universal level, is also a primary theme of archaic Eastern cosmology. It is the familiar second fundamental of Theosophia, an essential key to understanding nature and the evolutionary process. It speaks of our present universe as a vast but limited period, and only one of an infinite number of such periodical manifestations called Maha Manvantras. Between each of these enormous periods of manifestation and equal in length is a period of non-manifestation, of rest, perfect harmony, and renewal, where all seeming diversity and multiplicity is dissolved and reabsorbed back into its quiescent unity. All beings and kingdoms of nature return like sparks to the one flame. All dimensions and divisions of space reintegrate into the dimensionless. All seeming boundaries of time, past, present, and future, are reunited in boundless duration. All aspects and conditions of consciousness and energy re-enter their formless, unconditioned essence. And all formless spiritual essences seamlessly merge into their non-dual oceanic origin. These periods of nirvanic universal unity, which esoteric philosophy says are more real than the countless periods of being and manifestation, are known as Mahapralayas, the sleep or death of Brahma. The appearance and disappearance of the universe are pictured as the outbreathing and inbreathing of the great breath, which is eternal, and which, being motion, is one of the three aspects of the absolute, abstract space and duration being the other two. When the great breath is projected, it is called the divine breath and is regarded as the breathing of an unknowable deity, the one existence, which breathes out a thought, as it were, which becomes the cosmos. So also is it when the divine breath is inspired again. The universe disappears into the bosom of the Great Mother, who then sleeps wrapped in her invisible robes. Laya in esoteric philosophy is not simply dissolution or rest. It is both the zero point from which differentiation commences in its descent into manifestation, and where differentiation ceases when the seeming many return to the one. It is the boundless container of all that has been and the germinal essence of all that will be. Like the mathematical point, it is infinitely small, but as the container of all, both being and non-being, it is infinitely large. The idea of space and eternity in Pralaya is symbolized in the secret doctrine in the first pages of the proem as a pure white disk on a dull gray ground. The ancient philosophers, wrote HPB, uniting the visible and the invisible infinitudes in one, represented this deity or theos and its outward veil alike by a circle. In the dialogue Critolus, Plato gives an etymological definition of the word theos, derived from a Greek verb meaning to run or to move. In the Timaeus, he makes of it a boundless sphere in rotation upon its own center, quote, a circle moving in a circle. Because nothing lies outside the circle, no circumference or boundary can be located. Therefore, its center also exists everywhere. From HPB again. The breath of the one existence is eternal, perpetual motion, unceasing, even during pralaic eternities. It unites the ever-becoming with the ever-universally present and the ever-existing. It is a perpetual, never-ceasing evolution, circling back in its incessant progress through eons of duration into its original status, absolute unity. Because analogy and correspondence are a fundamental law of nature, as we're told, by studying the large, we can better understand the small. By studying the small, we can also better understand the large. And this applies at multiple levels. Cosmic pralaya is analogous to human sleep and death. This is perhaps why the true philosopher, as Plato pointed out in the Phaedo, is one who is ever preparing for death, for it holds the secret of being and of true self-knowledge. If we wish to become more familiar with the states of consciousness we pass through on a nightly basis and between incarnations, we would do well to study and meditate, it seems, upon what the philosophy offers in relation to cosmic pralaya. And this is, in fact, what the first three stanzas of Xian address. On page 21 of the proem, H.P. Blavatsky summarizes them in this way. The first stanza describes the state of the one all during pralaya, before the first flutter of reawakening manifestation. A moment's thought shows that such a state can only be symbolized. To describe it is impossible, nor can it be symbolized except in negatives. For since it is the state of absoluteness per se, it can possess none of those specific attributes which serve us to describe objects in positive terms. Hence, that state can only be suggested by the negatives of all those most abstract attributes which men feel rather than conceive as the remotest limits attainable by their power of conception. And then she goes on to talk about stanza 2 in this way. The stage described in stanza 2 to a Western mind is so nearly identical with that mentioned in the first stanza that to express the idea of the difference would require a treatise in itself. Hence, it must be left to the intuition and the higher faculties of the reader to grasp, as far as he can, the meaning of the allegorical phrases used. Indeed, it must be remembered that all these stanzas appeal to the inner faculties rather than to the ordinary comprehension of the physical brain. And then, in relation to stanza 3, she describes it as initially as the reawakening of the universe to life after pralaya. So, if you think we're done with pralaya, but in fact, in stanza 3 itself, and in her commentary in the Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, we learn that this portion of the reawakening of the cosmos being described occurs prior to the actual dawn of manifestation. The spontaneous radiation of the first unmanifested logos, called the Pythagorean monos, followed by the duad, called the manifested, and the third logos, called Mahat, or universal divine intelligence, the three constituting the primordial triangle and the hidden divine sun of a given universe, all occurs within the seventh eternity of the Mahapralaya. And this triadic, formless, primeval radiation is also illustrated in the page 200 diagram as the three higher formless realms. The pure, bright essence of Alaya, eternal and unchanging throughout the life of Brahma. They are the source of all true creativity, we're told, and are said to contain in potentia everything that will unfold in the seven eternities of the Maha Manvantara. Moreover, these three logoi she later identifies as corresponding to the higher triad in human nature, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, the three in one. Activating and awakening these three higher planes into conscious awareness and activity, she says, is the aim of the Bodhisattva path, the building of the Antaskarana bridge between eternity and time, the nirvanic state of Pralaya and samsara. May a Buddha or Mahatma be defined then as one who has not only transcended all birth and death, as well as the coming and going of worlds, but who with the opened eye of Dhamma can remain awake even during the long night of non-manifestation. This is more than hinted at in various ways in the teachings. In her commentary on Shloka 3 of stanza 5, for example, she points to that stage of descent in which universal, undifferentiated motion, thrilling through boundless space, translates via Fohat into the law of vortical motion, animating primeval matter. And in discussing this, she herself says that she had raised the question, who is there to ascertain the difference in that motion? Since all nature is reduced to its primal essence, and there can be no one, not even one of the Dhyani Chohans, who are all in nirvana, to see it. The answer to this is everything in nature has to be judged by analogy. Though the highest deities, archangels or Dhyani Buddhas, are unable to penetrate the mysteries too far beyond our planetary system and the visible cosmos, yet there were great seers and prophets in olden times who were enabled to perceive the mystery of breath and motion retrospectively when the systems of worlds were at rest and plunged in their periodic sleep. Such seers, she later tells us, have never disappeared from the earth. They constitute a great brotherhood of living adepts, an unbroken lineage extending back into the night of time. They have verified, preserved, and carried forth a knowledge passed down eons before by godlike beings present even at the dawn of the first races of our globe. And such seers have identified for us 7 different major kinds of pralaya pertinent to both cosmic and human evolution. And we're going to go through these very briefly, one by one. And some of them were only given a sentence or two in the teaching as a description. The Maha, or universal pralaya, also called a Maha Kalpa, or a life or age of Brahma, which we've been discussing to some extent, is equal in length to the 7 eternities of the Maha Manvantara, that is 311.04 trillion years. And it is also called the Prakritika in the Bhagavata Purana, the Prakritika Pralaya, where the universe as a whole returns to its primordial elements. All 7 or 10 planes of Prakriti or matter are merged into undifferentiated substance or Mula Prakriti, and all corresponding states or planes of consciousness, as we've already described, are merged in absolute consciousness. To us, this would be utter unconsciousness, we're told, and darkness. But to the seer, it would be a shadowless realm of absolute light. Everything in this period is merged in Brahma, or the divine unity, says HPB. And in the Mahatma letters, the statement is confirmed that the whole universe then must be re-evoluted de novo, entirely anew. The next level down that we're told about is the solar pralaya. And this marks the termination of an individual solar system when a cycle of 7 planetary chains has been accomplished, composed of 49 rounds. And there are a few, actually, several sentences in Mahatma letter number 67, which speak of this condition and both the solar Manvantara and Pralaya. And just a portion of what is said there is that it is a never ceasing work of higher levels of perfection, where each kingdom of nature, after their lethargic sleep in space, will again be re-energized or be energized into life in the new solar Manvantara. And when the solar Pralaya comes, the whole purified humanity merges into nirvana, and from that, intersolar nirvana will be reborn in higher systems. And this is perhaps also hinted at by Mr. Judge in The Ocean of Theosophy, where he speaks of the perfected humanity of one system becoming the Dian Chohans of a subsequent system. The planetary Pralaya is the Pralaya of a system that was given by the masters to be described in some detail, first by A.P. Sinnett in Esoteric Buddhism, and then again with much greater elaboration and detail in The Secret Doctrine. And it is composed, I know many of you are familiar with this, of 7 rounds, with each round composed of 7 great root races through which the whole of humanity passes. At its culmination, all monastic rays become consciously aware of their innate divinity and the logoic essence of the Dian Chohanic host of which they are an emanation. The pralaic passage from one planetary chain to the next is illustrated for us by this diagram on page 172 of volume 1. But understanding the meanings suggested requires years of study and the awakening of intuitive faculties, no doubt. For example, HPB writes that when the hour for Pralaya has struck, the monads or principles of each globe of the 7 rounds has to progressively transfer its life and energy to another series of globes through a nirvanic state represented by this singular dotted line between the 2 systems, which presumably lasts for the same period as the planetary Manvantara itself. And then there is the minor was called a minor pralaya, which occurs at the completion of each of the 7 rounds in a planetary system. And it is composed of 7 races. And in this case, we're told that everything remains in statu quo, in a refrigerated state, so to say, not destroyed by disintegration and dispersion, but passes into abscondito. And from this, the globes and monads involved will reemerge in their turn during the next septenary period. Within each minor pralaya is 7 root race pralayas. That is the period of obscuration and dissolution that unfolds with cataclysms of fire or water, which HPB says overspreads the earth during these periods and is accompanied by the rising or sinking of continental landmasses. The sinking of the lost continent of Atlantis, for example, we're told is no fairy tale, but marked the transition between the 4th and the 5th root races. But critical to this teaching is the role played by hierarchies of enlightened beings who act as the sutratmic thread, preserving the good that was achieved in a given race and providing the keynote of eternal wisdom that will guide the unfoldment of a newly regenerated humanity. And this brings us to the last type of pralaya that I'm going to speak about today and then hand it over to Jonathan. And that is called the Atyantika pralaya, which H.P. Blavatsky calls the Mahatmic state. the realization of the true self, apart from any and all of its manifestations. And it is described in the Bhagavata Purana in this way. When a cloud produced by the sun is riven, the eye sees the sun's form. When in the same way, the false ego that covers the soul is destroyed by spiritual self-inquiry, remembrance of the true self results. When one thus, with the sword of discrimination, has cut away the false ego, originating from illusion that binds the soul, and one has developed a firm realization of the infallible Supreme Spirit, one speaks of the entire annihilation or dissolution of one's materially determined existence, the Nitya Pralaya, dear King. Thanks for your patience in listening, and turn it over to Jonathan.
Okay. Thanks, Kurt. That was magnificent. Let me share my screen here. And so what Kurt gave us is an outline of what Pralaya means, the different kinds of Pralaya, large and the small. Well, the smallest wasn't that small. We're going to wait for this airplane to go past here. And what I'm going to try and touch upon is how we can use this in our living. And we all know that the world is going through huge changes, it seems like. And we kind of almost joke about it, but almost cry about it. That things are breaking down, what's going to happen, and things like that. And it seems very timely to be thinking about Nitya Pralaya in terms of, I guess, what you could call the metapsychological. And also the timing of that would fit in, I would think, with just the beginning of fall coming, because it's like seasonally we're going to be going into a Pralaya, you could say, which is going into winter. Now, the people in California are thinking, yeah, I hope we get winter. But the days will at least be getting shorter, no matter where you are. Actually, not in the southern hemisphere. But this is the time of year that we begin to anticipate the fall, the leaves falling off the trees, etc. So there's kind of a turning within that takes place. One of the metaphysical ideas that I kind of wanted to touch upon before we got into the metapsychological, which I think supports this inward dissolution that one can engage upon deliberately and with intention, is the idea that it seems like almost none of what is talked about in the beginning of the secret doctrine with the stanzas is limited to temporal sequence. Yes, it's talking about temporal sequence. There was the seven eternities of the universal rest of the universe. But then let's see here. Let me read a stanza or two. The seven ways to bliss were not. The great causes of misery and Maya were not, etc. Darkness alone filled the boundless all, etc. See how it's talking in the past tense. So that's a temporal sequence, right? But what we just wanted to point out here is that in a way, it's always Pralaya and it's always manifestation, in a way. It's ceaselessly Pralaya and there's ceaseless creation. So even in Pralaya, it's almost like saying even in sleep, there are cycles, right? And we know about the REM cycles and things like that. So even in Pralaya, there's still the great breath. And so there's some manifestation, even in Pralaya, it's relative Pralaya, it's relative sleep. And that's to say that even in manifestation, there couldn't be just ceaseless manifesting and ceaseless creation, because, or else it would be a static universe. So for there to always be creation going on, there has to be ceaseless dissolution, and that was pointed out by Kurt. So this kind of, I guess I wanted to mention the idea of an ontological beginning, an ontological understanding of the opening up of the universe and then the closing of the universe, like was shown in those pictures of the black holes and so forth. And so, yes, it happens in sequence, but it also happens in the unfoldment of being. So whatever you can say about the sequence of this happened before this, it happened ontologically prior to this. And then there's an ontological sequence. And in that context, given the fact that time is actually an illusion anyway, you can kind of go to the idea that at some level, there's always these abstract planes of beings going on, always. And as things unfold, there's always unfoldment going on. For example, how could you have the seven eternities if there wasn't cycles still going on in the Pralaya? That's just a thought, right? So you have the seven eternities in manifestation, and you have the seven eternities in the sleep cycle. So given all that, I wanted to introduce you to a buddy of mine. This guy is Basunda, and he is a character that figures in the Yoga Vasistha Maharamayana. And actually, I'm not sure that I've really met him, but Yoga Vasistha, the teacher in that dialogue, tells about Basunda. And Basunda, he sits in a kalpa tree, and he represents immortality. I've got a couple notes on him when you pull them up here. He's a wise crow. And Rishi Vasistha met him during one of his visits to the Devaloka. And he lives on this Kalpa Vrishka on a peak near Mount Meru. And a Kalpa Vrishka is a tree of life, or it's a world tree. And it was generated from the churning of the ocean of milk. And it's also associated with the Milky Way. So he's a Chiranjeevi, one without death, an immortal one, and he witnesses infinite cycles of dissolution and creation. And he says this kalpa tree whereon we dwell stands firm and unshaken amidst the revolutions of ages and the all-destroying blasts of tempests and conflagration. So Basunda has seen so many things come to go, including universes and worlds and oceans and mountains and everything at all levels. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about is all of these mythological symbols, they point to something within ourselves. And I'm hoping that we can expose ourselves to this idea of infinite creation and infinite dissolution, and come away with something that helps us in the path, in the theosophical path. And I wanted to point to this quote: "All is impermanent in man except the pure, bright essence of Alaya." So this ceaseless dissolution, as Kirk was pointing out in his last, the way he wrapped up his presentation, is something that's going on within ourselves. Ceaseless creation, ceaseless dissolution. So in a way, theosophically, there's ceaseless learning, yes, but there's also ceaseless dissolution. There's ceaseless unlearning, because to truly learn something, we have to unlearn something else. And that we theosophically, we're told again and again in many ways, we kind of have to get used to uncertainty. And I, well, I wanted to take you through a few sentences from the Voice of Silence that have to do with what alaya is. And I thought we'd try and get a feel for that just by reading these quotes. It says, and this is, remember, this is the permanence of what that we're looking for within all of this change. And everything that I think that alaya has to do with becoming grounded in that which is immortal within ourselves. So it's almost like the ashwatha tree that has its roots above and its branches and leaves below. You're becoming grounded in something that's that's metaphysical. We're becoming grounded in something that is relatively unmanifest. And by becoming grounded in that which is immortal, unmanifest, then we can negotiate all the change, it seems, and creatively embrace the change, and be compassionate with those around us who are working with change. So let me just take a quick look at this idea of alaya. So it says that man is its crystal ray, in thinking about alaya, a beam of light immaculate within, a form of clay material upon the lower surface. It says that beam is thy life guide and thy true self, the watcher and the silent thinker. And then it says it can be the victim of thy lower self. Now, who has alaya? Who has not alaya? Well, it turns out all men possess alaya. All men and women are one with the great soul. But alas, that possessing it, alaya should so little avail them. So we are not very much availed of this alaya that is within ourselves, of this beam of light immaculate within. And so, alas, that so few men should profit by the gift, it says in the Voice. And the priceless boon of learning truth, the right perception of existing things, the knowledge of the non-existent. Then it says, of teachers there are many, the master soul is one. Alaya, the universal soul. Live in that master as its ray in thee. Live in thy fellows as they live in it. And then it says something interesting. Well, it's all interesting, but here it says, thou hast to saturate thyself with pure alaya. Become as one with nature's soul thought. At one with it, thou art invincible. In separation, thou becomest the playground of sombrity. So it seems that we're being given a clue, and apparently this alaya has something to do with a dynamic equilibrium, and it's not a stasis, because that would be going against the law of the universe, where there's ceaseless creation and ceaseless dissolution. But it has to do with working with change, working with cycles, anticipating cycles, appreciating cycles, a certain reverence for the way of nature, and a gradual transformation. Because one of the things that sometimes we don't really talk about too much is that coming into the orbit of theosophy is a very dynamic thing for most people. And the degree to which they are moved by it usually is the degree to which they feel that there is a call to action. And yes, we have all this metaphysics, but we start to learn about the idea that there are these perfected beings and that there's this brotherhood of bodhisattvas that my co-speaker referred to. And just coming into this orbit, whether we know it or not, we find ourselves making resolves, between the lines, within the sentences. And many of these resolutions are almost unbeknownst to ourselves. Some of them are on purpose, some of them are designed with intention. And who are we making these resolutions to? We're making them to our own higher self. And that turns on a special witness light within ourselves. And we begin to see this incredible transformation going on, and one that we may not have anticipated. And it becomes like the story of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. The arrows start to fly. And it's interesting that when there's so much change going on within ourselves, it becomes almost all that much more dramatic, you could say, to witness all the change going on within the world. It's almost like adolescents. They have such a hard time with their parents getting a divorce, for example, because they're going through so much change and they're confused about how come other people, why is the world changing so much? Can't they just sit still? And so it's kind of like that. So in other words, when a person is going through transformation, they're coming into the atmosphere and the environment of a life much, much larger than themselves. And ultimately, they become to find that it has to do with working for humanity. And they come into a field of others who are working for humanity. Here it says, live in thy fellows as they live in it. So then there becomes this kind of deep-rooted alaya within a whole group, you could say. And so one of my favorite quotes from Sri Raghavan was, the orbit of the sacred is revolutionary. And I'm not going to say what that means. It's just that there's a dynamism there. And so I think that this idea of Nitya Pralaya lays a foundation, a deep, deep foundation for dealing with change and the opportunity for transformation. So we are pretty much past our time for the presentation part. I'm going to stop share. And we will open it up, and Kurt Gerdine will answer all the questions. So, if there are any.
Yes or nay?
Looks like Renee.
Thanks. Yes, I wanted to go back to a reference that Kirk made during Root Race Pralaya's description, talking about an atmic thread that's preserved through a root race pralaya between the root race manvantras. And just wanted a little more understanding on that atmic thread and how it is preserved, and thinking that it's somehow related to much of Jonathan's conversation about how this idea of Nitya Pralaya actually opens us up to seeing that which is continuous within ourselves in the midst of all this dissolution.
Yes. That's a great question, and of course, it's a mystery. So we don't pretend to be any kind of authority um, on such things, but it is, in fact, one of the themes that we would have developed more had with more time is this very idea, because there is quite a bit said about it in the Secret Doctrine and elsewhere in reference to the idea of the Manu, right? Because one of the ways that the word Manvantara is defined is between two Manus. Well, it seems, you could define the Pralaya in the same way. That is, just as a beginning and end of each Manvantara, there's a Pralaya at each end. So that what is spoken of as the root and the seed Manu, the beginning, you could say, seeds and beings of wisdom who initiate the entire cycle and set the keynote for the cycle, as we're told Krishna did at the start of Kali Yuga. That is the key function of what we could call, very broadly speaking, the human spirit. And this is just a remarkable part of the teaching that we find in the last half of this volume 2, where she's talking about the real nature of manus and rishis that perform this function. So even though I spoke about it only in relation to the root races, it applies at every level of pralaya. That there are those beings who are fully awake, who have and either awakened during that cycle or were awake through previous cycles, and who are preserving the jewels of wisdom that were garnered, all the good that was garnered through that cycle. And when I actually, the word that I used was not the atmic thread, was the sutratmic thread. Which we know we have that magnificent idea in relation to the human soul as being this immortal thread going through innumerable lives, and upon which is secured that golden nectar of wisdom that is the essence of truth and of learning that was garnered in each particular life. But so that function, that capacity to assimilate the meaning and the wisdom that was garnered through that long cycle of incarnation by countless beings participating, to assimilate, to garner it, to preserve it, even through the pralaya, so that it can then become a living aspect of the next manvantara, the next birth, the next race. This, as you can imagine, this is the absolutely critical function. And this is what she says in that the manu, the other meaning associated with the manu is the logos itself. That they constitute the logos. They are the origin from which all humanities and all beings involved in any given cycle are emanated from. They are the origin of all life that takes place within that cycle. They give birth to it all through this mysterious process of emanation, which is discussed in some detail in cosmogenesis. But they are, through a process of dhyana, we call dhyana. They, in fact, give birth to all that takes place on all kingdoms, and then incarnate into it, and then preserve the wisdom that is garnered in that cycle to carry it forward in the next one. So it's a really magnificent idea with so many dimensions to it, Renee. So I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Judy?
Oh, yes. Thank you both for wonderful, profound presentations. I just want to talk again about the Laya point. I think it was Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa that said God is a sphere whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. Well, then, could we say theosophically that each of us is a Laya point, and every point is a place of creation, constant creation? I mean, the secret doctrine says in the first fundamental, omnipresent, excuse me, eternal, immutable, boundless principle. So is each of us a Laya point, and is this constantly a point of ceaseless dissolution and ceaseless creation in a universe that might be physically finite in terms of its matter on our plane, but actually infinite in terms of all spirit?
Well, thank you, Judy. That's a very mystical question, very beautifully put, and don't think that we could add too much, except that when we wouldn't want to mistake a Laya point as being something that can be located in space and time, right? That is one of its features, is that whereas a mathematical point can be located in space, a Laya point cannot. So in one sense, your question kind of answers itself, that when we say that each of us is a Laya point, that means that each of us is the whole. Each of us has the potential of all humanity, has the capacity for embracing all humanities, past, present, and future. That's the other thing that is so magnificent about the idea of Pralaya, which she brings up, is that time is non-existent in that realm. Space, what we think of as space, is non-existent in that realm, and it in itself generates a whole number of questions. For example, it seems like the Pralaya, as Jonathan's pointing out, seems like it's an interminably long period, especially the Mahapralaya. But if time and space is transcended, then how can we think of it as an enormous length of time? In fact, she uses that phrase in I think it's page 15 of the SD, that the coming and going of universes is like a wink in the eye of self-existence, right? So that the judge encourages us to think of what we would call ourselves, the self, as being beyond that the coming and going of universes. He recommends that as one of the most edifying forms of meditation, is that our very breath is not just analogous to, but is in some sense the coming and going of the cosmos, and that which observes it is beyond, transcends it, and is one with it all. So those are just a few thoughts. Thank you for your question.
I'd like to just add just a little bit to that before we get to Jeff. Well, I think of that idea that we all, that universally all human beings and all points in nature, all life is, I find that incredibly inspiring in kind of a realized brotherhood kind of a way. It's one thing to say it's all one, and then somehow go from there to solidarity. Let's all hold hands, and nothing wrong with holding hands. It's just that when you start to understand another person or another being, even if it's not a being in the human kingdom, when you start to kind of understand the journey that they're on, then you're starting to tune into that person or to that entity, it seems. And to think of us all going through this incredibly dynamic process of transformation, ceaseless change, of learning and letting go, of unfolding the wisdom that is within, locked within the divine monad within all beings, human beings as well as the animal kingdom and all the other kingdoms, unfolding that divine potential and the assimilation of experience at the same time, which itself is learning and unlearning, gaining and ungaining, learning and then renouncing, and then moving on, and so forth. Just ceaseless, and everybody's going through that. It's kind of the basis of not only a real sense of solidarity, but a real sense of compassion, it seems. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you for a really intelligent, intelligible
I'm going to
talk.
5 minutes now.
Okay. Yes.
Oh.
Go ahead.
What is it, Renee?
Oh, Renee, did you want to? Oh, you got your hand up.
Go ahead, Jeff. Renee is next.
Okay. So that's the problem. I want. How do you know that pralayas exist? If everything, if river, you can never step in the same water twice, as Heraclitus says. How can you posit the existence of something called a pralaya?
Kirk, that one's all yours.
I'm pulling a great question. That's what Socrates did in Theaetetus, and so he has the same question. And of course, it's so. What I'm pointing at is that we're talking. It's a really intelligent talk, and we're using concepts, and all of those are based on some sort of idea of permanence. That we're referring to something that exists and that has a continuous existence, right? And I'm wondering if, if everything is in motion, there's motion that doesn't have a purpose or a direction, and motion that doesn't. And it seems, looking at some of the quotes that you read, like, for example, the one about the solar pralaya, it's like when everybody, or maybe it was the planetary pralaya, when everybody becomes perfect, then that's when the pralaya happens, or those two things coincide. So it seems like that implicit in this discussion of motion is a movement toward a state of perfection. Mm-hmm. Would that state of perfection be, so to speak, the not static point, but somehow the rest, the point of rest, or the point of reference that we're using? It seems like that the idea implicit in the very idea of motion, like Plato always pairs, like in Sophist or in Timaeus, he pairs the concepts of rest and motion together. And for Plato, I think he was very concerned about the need for intelligibility, both in discourse and in knowledge. And he spoke of the world of becoming, but also the world of being. And the world of being is what he identified, in some sense, this is kind of in quotes, as rest. So I'm wondering if you have some idea of like the complementarity of
you could just
not
of stasis, but somehow of dynamic rest. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, Jeff, and very deep and fundamental. So, but I'm not going to try and get into all the intricacies of it, but I think just as a very broad response that perhaps is helpful, that we found helpful, is that when we go to texts like the Secret Doctrine, like the Voice, like the Gita, and some of these ancient Tibetan texts, which have only recently been translated, we have the idea that for the enlightened sage, for the bodhisattva, one of the you could say features of that enlightened condition is that samsara and nirvana are no longer polar opposites. That and that, exactly what that means, and how one gets to that realization, would be a long discussion and a whole nother talk. but that just affirming that which we're told, that there is a point of realization in which there's a complete transcendence of that oscillation and all duality, all self and other, past and future, samsara and nirvana, all duality. So there's a unity, and Vedanta, of course, talks about this as well. And so, but that at the same time, mastering the natural fluctuation that occurs on the planes of illusion, right? Because HPB says this repeatedly. She says, "Well, actually, nothing's really taking place. This is all, it's because you have a finite conception of time, and that's why you think that time is happening, right? It's all the limitations of the mind, So, but apparently, the reality is that besides us, there's a lot of other beings that get caught in the cycle, and and it's a necessary cycle of descent, right? A necessary sort of obscuration of that primal understanding that we had when we started on the journey. That because through that process of going, entering the cave and pulling ourselves out of it, something is gained that cannot be gained otherwise, and beings are benefited by it. We're preparing all the kingdoms of nature as well to enter into the human kingdom in the next cycle. So it's performing its fundamental function in nature, the cycle of nature, and so we need to understand it. We need to be able to all the colors of the rainbow. All the sounds of the musical scale need to be understood if we're going to, in future incarnations, aid other beings to transcend, to learn from, to garner the wisdom that can be garnered, and to eventually transcend and perfect themselves again, so that the cycle, which is, as you pointed out, it's ever higher levels of perfection that is going on. So it's so at one level, yes, it's illusory. At another level, it needs to be understood and mastered, and that's what we're engaged in, apparently.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we get compassion, because compassion was said to be the very essence of Alaya in the Voice of the Silence. If I'm following you right.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, John. Can you say something?
No, yeah. Can we hear from Cliff?
Okay.
I guess my question is, so mainly, Kirk, your talk was focusing on Pralaya and Jonathan's was focusing on Alaya, and they both have the Sanskrit word laya in them. So I was wondering what the connection is between Alaya. In the first stanza of Xian, it talks about the opened eye of the Dogma is throughout Pralaya, and you're talking about also the wink in the eye of self-existence. And then Patanjali talks about at the time of concentration, the soul abides in a state of a spectator without a spectacle. So I'm wondering if both Pralaya and Alaya have something to do with a concentrated center of perception. Does perception have something to do with the mystery of Pralaya and Alaya?
Why don't you handle that? And then I got a quote that would pertain, but go for it. Yeah, especially the way you broke down the word Pralaya anyway. So,
well, that's another really wonderful and difficult question. is perception. How did you put it? Is perception the what? Summarized, Cliff?
Does perception have something to do with both the idea of pralaya, a center, a concentrated center? That's what Patanjali is saying, that at the time of concentration, the soul abides in a state of a spectator without a spectacle. So I'm thinking concenter, the idea of pralaya and alaya having something to do with this concentrated state of perception.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really great question, Cliff. And it actually links up with what Jeff's question, I think, because one of the things that is said about these states of unity is that the knower, the object of knowing, and the faculty of knowing are all merged. And that's why it says it is the unknowable, because it's not any form of knowledge that we can normally think of or discuss in outside of this concept of an integral unity. Right? It's not. It can't be made an object of knowledge. There's no longer perceiver and perceived, and so that form of consciousness is, as HPB says, one of the ways that you can describe the Atman is as the witness, the one witness, right? So it is a faculty of perception itself that would, you could say, be observing itself by means of itself. And that's, I believe that's Shankaracharya talks about that. It's something that unfolds of itself, like the clouds dispersing in the sky, and that quote from the Bhagavatam. So yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting question, a very interesting way to put it. That ultimately that is what we're talking about, is a wakefulness in which there isn't any captivity to multiplicity, and yet there's a perfect understanding of it as well, a perfect comprehension. That's one of the ways that the awakening of the Buddha is spoken of, is omniscience. It's a conscious omniscience. So I don't know what else to say. Maybe Jonathan can offer something.
I would just like to share my screen on this thing here. I have a quote, and it's from chapter 13 of the distinguishing and the discrimination between the Kshetra and the Kshetrajna. And the Kshetra is the body, it's the field, and the Kshetrajna is the soul, or at least in this case, the knower of the field. And you have to remember this chapter 13, it's the one where we get introduced to the three gunas. I think they're alluded to before, but this really kind of breaks them down and so forth, because the idea of the three gunas is it's kind of explaining all this change and giving structure to it and so forth. And this quote here is a larger version of the quote that was in the Aquarian Almanac, which in turn we put in the flyer. So you'll recognize this part of the quote in the flyer. But anyway, it's talking about, okay, so the question was about alaya. And my experience, and others can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the word akasha and alaya can be almost substituted with each other. They're just different systems, and there's no perfect anything. But basically, they both can refer to the word space, by the way, which in turn can refer to the word shunyata, or even emptiness, which in turn really means interdependence, and which in turn means brotherhood and solidarity. But so here's the quote. As the all-moving akasha, by reason of its subtlety, passes everywhere unaffected. So this is the idea of that which does not change. So the spirit, though present in every kind of body, is not attached to action nor affected. So you could say that this Nitya Pralaya thing has to do with engaging in action, but not without being attached. It's renunciation of the fruits of action. Now, here's kind of an ontological aspect. As a single sun illumineth the whole world, even so doth the one spirit illumine every body. So that's setting you up for this. Those who, with the eye of wisdom, which is this concentration thing, and the eye of Dhamma and so forth, thus perceive what is the difference between the body and the spirit, and the destruction of the illusion of objects go to the supreme. So somehow this chapter 13 has to do with being able to perceive the difference between the formless and the form, the spirit being the domain of pure potential, and the body being the field of form and action. And in this way, we become less immersed in all of this confusion and activity. Because if it is true that, let's see here. Oh, yeah. In this upper quote up here, whenever anything, whether animate or inanimate, is produced, it is due to the union of the kshetra and the kshetrajna, body and soul. So, but when there's dissolution, you could say, that's when there is no longer the union of the kshetra and the kshetrajna. And that can be done deliberately and on purpose with intention by realizing the difference between the kshetra and the kshetrajna. So I don't know if this helps or makes things more confusing, but I think it has to do with the heart of this. And I can't explain any further why. So I'll stop sharing here. So I think we're pretty well past our time. Thank you all for attending. I told you it would be a fasten your seatbelts thing. Kurt, you did just a magnificent job as usual. So I really appreciate it. So
Thanks to everyone, and thanks for the great questions. Wow.
Wow. Well, each one of those questions could be its own, seminar. So
yeah.
So great, both of you. Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Jonathan and Kirk.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening in and sharing.
Thank you so much.
Even if you didn't share, thanks for listening in.
Yeah. I mean, your presence is a big part of it. So thank you so much.
Everybody be well and safe.
Well taken. Thank you very much. You too, Monica.
Thank you.